this episode of the podcast, I have with me Michelle Avery. She's Group VP of AI at WillowTree at TELUS International Company. We're going to be talking about prototyping Gen AI solutions. And I think really the key part of this discussion is going to be how do we move from a prototype to a production solution. We're going to be talking about what some of those gaps might be, getting past the bot. A lot of applications we see that are Gen AI are very bot-centric, so how to get past the bot. And user acceptance, I think that's a big component to this, and how do we know when something's right to go to production? Michelle, I'm excited to have you on the show. Thank you for your time.
No, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here. This is a topic I am quite passionate about.
Awesome. All right. So tell us what WillowTree, which is a TELUS International Company, does so that everyone has some context.
Awesome. So we're a digital product agency. So we build products for clients kind of from the ground up, from strategy through to production, release. We do some R&D and things as well in the generative AI space, which is part of my job. So we're looking at how we can help our clients stay on the cutting edge of AI technologies, of technology in general.
Okay, cool. I'm sure you're dealing with a lot of stuff that we'll be talking about today. And, I guess as you're on the front lines and you're out there, you're dealing with some of the technology around LLMs. When we're looking at building an application, you gotta talk to us about what prototyping looks like for an enterprise that wants to look at Gen AI as a solution. What does that even, where does that even come out to be for a company?
So when we're doing prototyping with clients, we try to be very intentional about why are we building a prototype? Why are we building a prototype and not just spending that money on a production implementation? And part of the reason is when that comes to generative AI specifically, the technology is so new and changing so often that it's a lot harder to know going into it. How much is it going to cost to build something? How much is it going to cost to make it production ready? How good can we make it? Is this technology even the right fit for the thing that we're trying to accomplish? And so we try to be very, very focused on those unknown things, right? We don't want to go waste your money building a prototype that solves things that we know how to solve. When we are prototyping, it's very intentional. We try to bring all of our knowledge and background to the table and look at what don't we know and what do we hope to learn from building this prototype, and very much focus on that. For a lot of our clients, it's getting hands-on experience with something. They want to be able to take something tangible and share that with their board, show that to end users to kind of get some feedback. And for that, they kind of need something that's sort of built quickly and answers the question of how good can we make this?
That's actually really interesting, because I think when you look at obviously how new everyone is running to learn about the capabilities, and because you see this across the board, is there a particular area or a particular pain point that most companies are looking at applying some of this prototyping to?
That's actually a really, really great question, because one of the things that I always talk to our clients about is actually what those pain points are. We frequently have always had this conversation. There's a data point that comes from the progress principle that talks about how if you start an innovation project with an idea first, if you go into it thinking, this is the technology I want to use, or this is the thing I want to build, that has about a 5% chance of actually being successful. Whereas if you come at it with an idea of, here's a business problem. It is a real problem that we need to solve. How are we going to solve it? What's the right technology to use? That has an 86% chance of success. And so we've always talked to our clients about what business problem are we trying to solve? That's the thing we need to start with and where we need to begin. And what we're finding with generative AI is that we have to have that conversation more often, because people are coming at it with, I have a generative AI budget. What can I spend this generative AI budget on? And that's the problem that we don't want to solve. So we kind of want to work past that and look at what business problems do you have that are really important that we look into. And of those, what is best to be solved with generative AI? And it's not always the first thing that comes to mind, right? We go through workshops with clients. We help them think through what their business problems are, what might we solve. And there are a lot of times we end up solving a different, bigger problem than the one they thought they were going to use for generative AI.
This is new. I mean, it's not that people have really had a lot of time to digest and see where it's been working across industries. very early adoption. These are good, fun problems to have. Are there cases where companies just can't see that opportunity yet, just because it hasn't been used maybe in their industry, or they haven't seen a way a Gen AI solution has come to market so that they can envision how their company can benefit from it?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why we kind of walk through things like, use case identification workshops. We also do a good bit of training on like what generative AI is really good for and what it's not good for, to help people kind of understand and think through what are those other areas where we might find a good opportunity for applying the technology. We're also finding that because generative AI made AI so accessible to people, this was the first time a lot of people could really get their hands on something that they understood was AI and see and play around with the ideas of what might be possible, that everything starts with generative AI. And a lot of times there's an opportunity for us to kind of bring other AI technologies into the picture that are maybe better for the particular problem at hand.
That's interesting. Obviously, AI, deep learning, Gen AI, obviously there's, different levels of sophistication to the technology we're talking about. As you're seeing users and you're going through this ideation, try to help the education, when that light bulb comes on and they're like, I can see the opportunity, maybe this is how we built the prototype, and you identify that, what are some obstacles to actually getting that prototype to them? Because obviously they might have never delivered a solution like this, and it might be the first, and probably is the first time they're doing it.
The biggest obstacle we run into is data, particularly if we need to connect to systems of record for something that can be a problem. That's the biggest problem that we run into because we offer full service sort of teams. So we work frequently with like marketing organizations who have no technology team whatsoever. So there are places where we work with other teams, but we can work entirely independently. So it's really that data access, that system access that we can't do on our own that tends to be the problem.
Yeah, I guess that is becoming the force of the day. We're seeing the data conversation come up in terms of the obstacle to actually take advantage of advanced, which is interesting because I think I'm old enough to know that data has always been part of the core issue of any of the technology solutions we've ever wanted to deliver, let alone one that's as complex as Gen AI. I guess when you guys do have the prototype working and you're looking to get feedback, and there's some expectations and there's some thoughts around it, when you are looking to take something to production, what changes from that prototype to production for an average customer? How close are we when we go to production?
The AI bits should be there, right? We generally start with, we take like an evaluation driven approach to prototyping, right? So it's very important to define what good looks like before we even start. That's not we build a prototype and then we try to decide whether or not it's good enough, right? Generative AI, because it's non-deterministic, anytime you're making changes to the system, it's important to know how those changes are going to affect your end result. So generally, the things that we don't do, right? That what is the difference between the prototype that we would build, like what we consider a good prototype, which is sometimes different than the prototype that we kind of start with. It's like sometimes people come to the table with like, hey, we have this prototype of this thing, can we make that into production? That's a different definition. But when we deliver a prototype, what we're not doing is necessarily defining all the architecture at scale, right? We build enough that we understand how much it's going to cost, but standard known components aren't there. Logging and monitoring sometimes are things that we add in after the fact. The UI, right? We know how to build great UIs. We know we know what it's going to cost. We know how to do it. We know what technology we need to use. So that's not generally a heavy part of the prototyping process. Like you get something generally kind of lightweight, whatever meets your needs. Sometimes we do have clients who are like, I need to take this around to the board. It needs to look nice. That's going to take a little bit more work. But the general idea of like, what is this good enough to launch? You need to be able to answer before you decide to go to production.
I guess as this is maybe a first time event application project for a lot of companies. That part of knowing this is right. That's a bigger conversation, because I think around Gen AI, we have the conversations of hallucination. How do we actually evaluate the result? How do we know it's the optimal one? I mean, there's a lot of things, because sometimes you do feel like it's a little black box. When you are talking to customers to establish, right, what does that conversation look like? How do you set parameters to, know where the guardrails are to, well, this seems to be right?
So we normally start with what we call a trustworthy AI workshop, where we kind of walk through educating the entire team around what sort of risks and similar applications and similar industries have made it out into the wild. And we talk about where a company's sensitivity is to those risks, which ones actually apply to the situation. We generally try to bring in a cross-disciplinary group to do that. So we try to get whoever the product owners are going to be in the room, along with, if there are legal stakeholders that have particular concerns, or marketing and branding officials, and get everybody aligned on, what the outcome is that we're looking for. And then we kind of build our architecture around that, right? Is this an internal application where we actually aren't worried about malicious actors? We're going to take a different approach than if this is a end user facing application where we need to worry about people who are abusing the system to drive up cost intentionally, right? That helps us kind of keep those things in mind from the start. And then I will say it is hard to define good, right? Good is going to depend on the company. It's going to depend on the context, and it's going to change over time as well. Our research team wrote a really great paper about evaluating conversational attributes, and they're specifically looking at how do we measure politeness in a response from an LLM. And there isn't a single answer to is this polite, right? You really have to work and define what works for the company. I think another important thing is making sure that you design your system for user feedback, right? Your end users need to understand that they're working with an AI-based system, and they need to have the opportunity to give feedback and say, hey, that's not good. And you need to be able to take in that feedback in a way that lets you kind of integrate it and iterate, because it's not a one-time sort of thing.
And lots of great observations there. And the one thing that I've asked for many years, and I'm curious, because when my first episode launched on the podcast was about AI, and my question was about ROI, and I think I'm kind of shifting that conversation of ROI to, I guess, in the case of a customer who's like, okay, well, we're going to do the prototype, seems good, we're going to go to production. For them to spend more money, typically in other areas of technology, there's got to be some proven quote unquote value that they see, right? We have whole product backlogs based on value and whatnot. How does that conversation look in this situation? Because it's brand new, never done it, no baseline, not even sure there's really mechanisms clearly defined to evaluate financial spend to the perceived value, because it is a lot of new stuff, and I'm not sure we're there yet. But how do you see that conversation? You're in the weeds on this one.
Yeah, so that's one of the main reasons that we prototype, right? That helps us to figure out and it's one of the reasons that that I said all of that generative AI components has to be in place for that prototype to be good, because that lets us predict cost to an extent, right? We understand at that point what kind of guardrails we have to put in place to prevent certain things, and that can add cost to it. It's also a reason that we really like to start up front with that conversation about what is the business outcome that we're trying to achieve, what's the problem we're trying to solve, because we can't know whether or not it makes sense to build generative AI for a particular thing if we don't know what a good ROI looks like for that client, and what their current costs are that we're trying to eliminate.
I guess the question maybe that comes from that, and maybe this kind of ties into the prototype, is the user acceptance piece. And I know we talked about how things are measured as in they are right, and to have that conversation. That user acceptance piece, as you're going through testing and you're kind of guiding through that prototype, making sure that you have defined some of those parameters. When you see the production, and you look at users, how much of the stuff that's being built is being used? I mean, obviously, I know you guys do this across a lot of companies, but is there high adoption of and acceptance of the actual production products that are being put out?
Yes, because the reason for that is that if your application is super focused on being an AI application, that's not the sort of thing that we generally build for clients, right? If you're building an AI application, you're a product-based company with your own dev team frequently, right? So we're building things for companies whose business is something else. And if your business is something else and you apply generative AI in a way that improves your user experience, adoption isn't a problem. You're not asking them to go use AI instead of something else. You're blending it into the user experience in a way that just makes sense for them.
And you mentioned something that I liked, and I guess you can speak to it a little bit, because I thought moving past the bot is interesting. And we talked about that because I think a lot of people, because of the nature of ChatGPT being one of the more popular solutions people have had experience with, there's maybe a preconceived notion of that interaction, that preconceived notion of how the product might fit. Obviously, ChatGPT isn't a bot in the sense of it pops up a chat window, but it's a very much, I put a prompt and I get a response back. Very much that type of. How do you have that conversation to kind of shift people's minds that we don't need to think about this like a question, prompt, answer type of product?
That comes into play a lot when we talk about both ROI and risk and user experience, because a chatbot can be none of those things if you're doing it wrong, right? The user experience of a chat interface isn't always the best, right? It could be really good for some things, but not for others. So there, we frequently share mock-ups of other work that we've done, other work that we've pitched with clients, and help them kind of think outside the bot, so to speak. And then when it comes to ROI, if you're putting out a public-facing chatbot, you have to be very careful about what it is actually going to put out there. And there is some cost involved and some additional architecture that has to kind of go around making that safe and cost-effective. And that can be expensive to do. If what you're trying to solve is my end users can't find the right information on my website, and so I want to put a chatbot up there, that's where we would maybe talk about some different options. Is it actually the information architecture of your website that's a problem, and is that something we need to fix? That's maybe not a generative AI solution. Or do we need to let the user have a different way of interacting with your website that lets them navigate to what they're looking for using generative AI, right? That's a great, really low risk and inexpensive option, because without that back and forth, there isn't the opportunity for malicious actors. It's not as much fun to just try to abuse your website by driving up your costs, which is something that we have seen people attempt to do, right? They send completely nonsense messages just because they're angry at a company. And the risk there is pretty minimal. They end up on the wrong web page. That's not a great user experience, but it's not the same kind of thing as agreeing to generate malicious code for a user.
Absolutely. Interesting. Yeah, I think when we first talked about this topic, I was like, it's actually an interesting one, because I think a lot of people are going through this process, and there's a lot of learning that's happening, and people are trying to figure out where to apply the technology. And I think the prototyping side of it doesn't get discussed at all. So I'm glad you were able to come on and kind of share with us. And you obviously have a deeper expertise in it. If somebody does want to, pick your brains on something you mentioned, because obviously I did not exhaust all possible questions on this episode, what's a good way of touching base with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can also go to our company's website at WillowTreeApps.com. We have a contact us form. I've got my profile up there, or my email address is michelle.avery@WillowTreeApps.com.
Okay, awesome. I will make sure we get some of those links into the show notes. Thanks again for being on the show. I really do appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me. It was a great conversation.
Absolutely. That's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. But until then, two things. One, I think this was a great conversation. As I just said, I think talking about the prototyping side of these solutions, I rarely hear it on a podcast. I rarely had it on my show. So I thought it was really great to talk about it and really see what, is being done out there and what are some of the challenges to even get to the production state. Because I think a lot of people are still trying to figure it out. And if you guys need something more, please contact Michelle or WillowTree, and I'm sure they will have some answers for you. If you like the podcast, please share it with somebody else who you think also might like it. Like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.